of child labor. A report by Amnesty International 2 years ago first uncovered that children were mining the mineral cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC as it's known. It ended up in products from dozens of companies, including Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, and Samsung. Cobalt is needed in batteries powering common devices like our cell phones, laptops, and in the growing number of electric cars. Deborah Pata traveled to the DRC to follow the complex supply chain. She joins us from Johannesburg, South Africa, with this story. Deborah, good morning.
Good morning. The DRC is embroiled in conflict, and it's difficult and sometimes dangerous to report from there. On a recent trip to the south of the country, we saw what looked like the Wild West.
They're digging in trenches and laboring in lakes, hunting for treasure in a playground from hell. Hard enough for an adult man, unthinkable for a child. And yet tens of thousands of Congolese kids are involved in every stage of mining for cobalt. More than half the world's supply comes from the DRC. 20% of that is mined by hand. We traveled along collapsing dirt roads. Children are everywhere, digging for cobalt in abandoned open pit mines. And it's clear security officials in charge here, only some of them in uniform, have something to hide.
There's such sensitivity around cobalt mining that every few hundred feet we get stopped requesting letters, documents, even though we have official permission to be here.
But for the Chinese middlemen we saw who buy the cobalt, there are no such constraints. They have free access to the mines. Inside, women and children are doing so-called artisanal mining. But don't be fooled. This is no quaint cottage industry. At barely 10 years old, children lug heavy sacks of cobalt to be washed in rivers. From as early as 4, they can pick it out of a pile. And even those too young to work spend much of the day breathing in toxic fumes.
The officials deny that there's child labor. Clearly it's obvious that there is, but whenever a camera or a security person or a policeman appears, then the children are chased away.
Ziki Swazi is 11 years old and agreed to meet us outside the mine.
Why aren't you in school?
My parents are dead, he said, and I stay with my grandma.
So you need to make money for your granny?
Yes.
We asked these companies whether child-mined cobalt is being used in their products. All acknowledge problems with the supply chain, but say they require their suppliers to follow responsible sourcing guidelines. Apple said it leads the industry in supply chain standards and last year cut ties with the largest artisanal cobalt supplier. Microsoft told us it does not tolerate child labor and that they are working with NGOs to eliminate it. Samsung said it's mapping its supply chain, and Tesla explained it performs audits and has very little cobalt in its batteries. But our investigation shows just how complicated it is to trace child-mined cobalt in the global supply chain. We followed the mineral as it left the mines, piled high on every mode of transport available. Sacks were already mixed up without labels, making it impossible to know who had mined them.
The children's cobalt is brought here to this market, where it is bought by a Chinese company for extremely low prices.
We wanted to see whether there was any attempt to check if the cobalt had been mined by children. So our team went back later with a hidden camera. When we offered to sell a truckload of cobalt, nobody asked us who mined the mineral, only what the quality was. This man told us that the Chinese traders here bought all the cobalt and sold it mainly to one Chinese company, Kongo Dongfang Mining, known locally as CDM. CDM is owned by global Chinese giant Huayu, but Huayu said they stopped buying from that market last year and have put in place a detailed program to eliminate child labor from their supply chain. And yet, in this murky process of sourcing cobalt, one thing is clear: children are still here, carrying the weight of our high-tech world on their shoulders.
We spoke to 8 major tech companies who've been linked to this supply chain. And while some of them have joined initiatives to solve this problem, we saw very little evidence at the mines we visited of anyone actually helping these children. PACT, an NGO working with Apple, Microsoft and Huayu, described support from these companies as a drop in the ocean compared to the dozens of companies